After my last video in which I tested this cheap Chinese step and die set, I got some comments blaming the sloppy threads I made on a too big a hole size. I too used to believe this, but it's wrong, although it may have a marginal effect on the slop. I got some time to kill, so I thought I'd do a reply through a short video. After all, I made so many long videos lately. For this test I'm going to make M8 thread using this cheap Chinese tab that came out of the set you just saw, and this branded tab. I believe it's made by Dormer, not sure. The letters are rather small on here. Yeah, Dormer, and I think that's made in England. I've got 3 drill bits here, 6.5mm, and that's undersized for an M8 thread. 6.8, that's the one I normally use for M8 thread, and 7.5mm, and that's pretty big for an M8 thread. Let's measure these. The 6.5mm is actually 6.4. The 6.8 is 6.7. And the 7.5 is actually 7.1. 7.40. So according to my calipers, they're all 1/10 of a millimeter undersize. Let's drill some holes. First a pilot hole. These chips climb up into the chuck. Annoying. Six and a half millimeter. I have to deburr these, not only because otherwise they wouldn't be flat on the table, but also because they might make the thread feel tighter than it actually is. The 6.8mm drill. I know some of you guys probably won't like it that I'm using gloves on the drill press. Tighten up your grip the moment the drill comes through, and you should be fine. This drill press you can probably stop by just grabbing it. The belts are rather loose. I probably wouldn't use gloves on a 5 horsepower geared drill press, because those things can do some real damage. This baby drill press won't hurt a fly. I have deburred all the holes. Now let's measure them, and I'm pretty sure they will all be oversized. This is the 6.5mm drill. This is the 6.5mm drill as well. So that is almost a quarter of a millimeter oversized. The 6.8, that's 1/1500th in the second hole. That's a little better, not much, maybe 5/100th. And the last hole, the 7.5, is in fact, oh, that's pretty close, less than a tenth oversize. The second, that's pretty close. Alright. So now I'm going to thread these test holes, and I will be using the drill press to at least get the tab started. That way they will all be at the same angle. If you tap a hole at an angle, it also might up tighter than it should be. I'll start with the biggest hole and do the smallest last, because that one is a tenth undersized. It might break the tab. I don't think it will happen, but it might. And of course I'll use some lube, otherwise people will complain. I need an extra hand here. Let's see if I can make this work. The pressure on my finger is too much. Well, that's far enough to get it started. I'm too lazy to set up a clamp. Let's forget about the small hole. It just is too tight for the plug tab. Yeah, it's picking up the threads. So this hole was 6.95, something like that. Feels rather tight. It's basically done. Let's try this one again, but this time with the tapered tab. And this hole was 6.7, so that's a tenth of a millimeter smaller than the 6.8 drill that I always use for threading a mate. It's just as tight as that one. It's not harder to thread. It's now pretty hard to turn. I think we are through the worst. Yeah. Now we already know that this tab, this taper tab, makes a fully formed thread. So no need to thread it again. with the plug tab. The bolt is slightly sticking out on the underside, just slightly. And this is the slot for the 7.5mm drill. Moving to the 6.8. It was stupid of me to drill these holes so close to each other. Now I cannot demonstrate this with 2 bolts. And the last hole, which was made with the taper tab, that might be the worst of the 3. Let's measure the slop with a test indicator. Almost a full rotation, so that is about 8/10 of a millimeter. I would say maybe slightly better. Well, these are not really absolute measurements, but I would say this one is even slightly better. But really, there's not that much between these 3 threaded holes. Now I'm going to thread these 3 holes with that dormer tab, and then I will do the same test again. This is the smallest hole, and it taps so much lighter with this dormer tab. This one will not go all the way through. It's too thick over here. Alright, I'll clean this up and then I'm going to try and more or less measure the slop. I did my best to clean out all the swarf. So let's test this dormer tab with my highly scientific method, and I'm making sure it's also sticking out just slightly on the bottom. That's good. Trying to set this test indicator about halfway on the bolt head. Well, I was expecting a better thread from this dormer tab. That's a bit disappointing. And that's the smallest hole. And this is the 6.8mm hole. More or less just as disappointing. Not much better. Pretty much the same result and just as disappointing. So there you have it, absolute proof that the hole size doesn't really matter when it comes to the sloppiness of the thread. I wish I had an hydraulic press with an oil pressure gauge, then I could test the amount of pressure needed to press this bolt through the threads. And that would be a nice test to check the difference in the thread strengths. Alright, that's it for me. I will now shut up for the rest of the year, because I think that this video is going to be longer than the 5 minutes I had in my mind. Sorry about that.